Hi, English 1101 friends. This is another basic writing video to go, pretty close to the beginning of the semester before we can really get into writing papers. And one of the most famous books about writing, one of the most famous guides to writing, is a book called The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. It's originally written by William Strunk, who's a professor of English at Cornell. Then there were some additions made to it by E.B. White, who some of y'all may know. E.B. White's most famous for writing Charlotte's Web. Strunk and White's Elements of Style is about 100 years old now. It's in the public domain. It's pretty easy to look up and find if you want to. It's probably the most famous and influential writing guide, especially in the United States. And it's really short. It's really easy to read. You can see it's all of like 50 pages, and it's not. Most of these little chapters are super short, a paragraph, 2 or 3 paragraphs. But one of the chapters of Strunk and White's Elements of Style is words and expressions commonly misused. You can see it's chapter 5 in this edition. And I'm not going to go through their words and expressions commonly misused. However, I've got a list of 10 that I see commonly misused, that I called words and expressions commonly misused by Professor Sullins' students. And I'm going to go through those and explain the difference to them. I see these fairly often enough that I remembered all of them and made a list of them to show to you. So these are words and expressions that I see commonly misused, that confuse students, that students get wrong over and over again in writing. And so I want to call your attention to them. Maybe you'll see this and think about them for a few seconds, and then later when you're writing these, you'll a light bulb will go off in your mind and you'll remember, oh yeah, I remember when Professor Sullins explained the difference to me about this. The very first one of these is conscience versus conscious. Often I will ask a room full of students the first or second day of class in English 1101, does anybody in this classroom know the difference between these words? And nobody does. Conscience, the very first one here on the left, this is your moral sense of what's right or wrong. This is like if you've ever seen Pinocchio, if you remember Pinocchio when you were a kid. Jiminy Cricket is your conscience. This is what tells you what's right and wrong, what's good and evil, don't do this, do that. Conscious means you are not in a coma or not asleep. Conscious is the opposite of unconscious. If you're unconscious, you're asleep or in a coma. This means you are awake and alert. This is your sense, your moral or ethical sense of right or wrong, conscience. Your conscience tells you not to steal. All right, the next one is used to. I used to work at Target, but now I work at Amazon. Yeah, I used to smoke, but then I quit. Used to is spelled U-S-E-D because it's in the past. I used to work at Target. Well, that's in the past. Like a lot of words, the way you make the past tense is by adding D or ED. Like padded, P-A-T-T-E-D. I used to is U-S-E-D to, used to. I used to do this, or I used to go to Georgia Highlands, and then I graduated. The next one is weary versus wary. Weary, W-E-A-R-Y, means you're tired. You've been working all day, you're weary. You've been walking a long time, your legs are weary. Wary means you're cautious. You're wary of going into an old haunted looking house. Or you're wary of taking 6 classes because it might be too much to do. Wary means cautious. Weary is tired. The next one is, I think, one of those errors that people make that spell check just doesn't catch. A person who serves in the military is a soldier. That is spelled S-O-L-D-I-E-R. That is not spelled solider. Very often when I'll see students writing about being in the military, or their brother who was in the military or something like that, and they'll be talking about their brother who's a solider. Their brother was not a solider, their brother was a soldier. Solider is like, ice is solider than water. It's more solider means more solid, more dense, more thick. metal is solider than wood or something like that. But soldier is not solider. Very similar to this. Sometimes there'll be a storm in the sky, and like some electricity will build up in the sky, and then you will see this bolt, this light. The electricity will come down and hit the ground or hit a tree. That is lightning. You know, you will get thunder, and then you will get lightning. 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 That is not the same thing as lightening. Lightening it could mean two things. Lightening is the opposite of darkening. You know, at sunset the sky is darkening. At sunrise, early in the morning, the sky is lightening. Lightening can also mean, you know, if you've got a bag full of books and you take a bunch of books out of your book bag, you've lightened your book bag. So, you know, it's not heavier because you lightened it. But when electricity comes out of the sky, it's lightning. That's not the same thing as lightening. The next one I want to talk about is nowadays. Nowadays is a word. It means, you know, in current times, in contemporary times, right now, in the time period we're living in right now. You know, nowadays most people don't have landlines because they have cell phones. Nowadays is one word, and this is how you spell it: Nowadays. Nowadays. Nowadays, people say nowadays and write nowadays, and that's how you spell it. If you don't feel well and you can't go into work, the way that you let work know that you're not coming, that you won't be showing up at work today, is you call in sick to work. You don't call out sick. You can call in sick and tell them you will be out, but the expression is call in sick. And that is because when you call, the call comes in to the telephone at work, and you called in to work to tell them you were sick. Calling out means like yelling, like now I'm calling out to you. I'm yelling, I'm calling out. When you are sick and can't go into work, you call in sick. Call out sick doesn't make any sense unless you were like yelling at your boss really loud to let them know that you can't come in. So it's call in sick, not call out sick. When you are writing about decades, you write like this. If you were talking about the 1990s, the 1990s are before some of you all were born. When you were so if you're talking about the 1990s and you want to abbreviate it, it is apostrophe 90s, the 90s, not 90 apostrophe s. That is because 90s is a contraction of 1990s, and it works just like any other contraction. Just like can't is the contraction of cannot. So the apostrophe here is taking the place of an N and an O that we've taken out. Same thing here. The apostrophe here is taking the place of the 19 that we took out. This apostrophe here would be a possessive, and that doesn't make any sense. So when you write, 2000s or 2010s, the apostrophe goes where you took something out, where you contracted it. The next thing that is worth talking about, and this may be especially relevant when we get to the research paper in this class, but I have encountered this. I would have never guessed people misunderstood what this word means. But when people say journal, and they don't, and I'm not talking about like a diary or a journal, a personal journal that you keep. When people talk about academic journals, an academic journal is not an article. Like you can't cite a journal. You can cite an article from a journal, but a journal is like a magazine or a newspaper or like a website that has web pages on it. A journal is a big container, and it contains little things called articles. But a journal, like there's the newspaper in Atlanta called the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. That's because it is a big container that contains many articles. A journal is not an article. A journal contains many articles. And then the last thing I want to call your attention to is dialogue. When you write dialogue, when you write people speaking. My mom said, "Come inside, it's getting dark." So you get dialogue. My mom said, comma, and now we're about to get some dialogue. And then what did the mom say? Come inside, it's getting dark. So it's getting dark, period, quotation marks. In the United States, when you write dialogue, the punctuation goes inside the quotation marks. It's different in England. It's actually reversed in England. But since this is a class in the United States and we're all in the United States taking it, the way that you punctuate dialogue is last word, punctuation, quotation mark. The punctuation mark, the quotation mark is the last thing, and it wraps around everything else, including the period or the exclamation mark or the question mark or whatever it is, the other punctuation marks. So that gives you 10 things, 10 basic errors that I see fairly common, commonly enough to show them to you and teach them to you and try to help you not make them. If you have any questions about any of those 10, I'll be happy to go through them with you. And later in this semester, I may have 10 more that I want to go over with you. But I hope those are useful for you. And I hope this video wasn't too long or too boring, and maybe even I hope it made it laugh. I hope it made you laugh for a second. Thanks a lot, everybody.